My wife brought a strange man into our house, looked me in the eye, and without hesitation said, "Now this is the one I love." In the next instant, I felt a deep emptiness in my chest, a crushing weight on my shoulders, but I didn't let my face show weakness. No. She didn't deserve this. I kept my expression firm, swallowed the bitter taste of disappointment and let the words escape between my lips like a final verdict. Everyone already knows that you had a hidden affair. Our children are already aware of who you are. You destroyed everything. Don't come after me anymore. You won't gain anything in the divorce. Silence took over the room, but it wasn't an ordinary silence. It was an abyss, a black hole that consumed what was left of dignity in that failed marriage. Her eyes widened, but not with regret, with surprise. Didn't expect me to know. I thought I had control, that the lie I had been feeding for months was well hidden. But I already knew. I always knew. I just waited for the right moment to let her hang herself with her own words. She opened her mouth to say something, but hesitated. I tried to find some excuse, some way to reverse the situation, but there was no way out. No more. I observed her lover, a random man, an unimportant face, without history, someone who meant nothing to me. He was uncomfortable, out of place, an intruder amid the destruction he helped cause. Maybe he was waiting for me to react aggressively, to attack him, to lose control. But that would be a gift to them. And I wouldn't give gifts to traitors. Time seemed to stop as the weight of the words I spoke spread through the air, like ashes of something that was once beautiful, but was now nothing more than ruins. Our children knew. I made sure of that. And that was the worst punishment for her. The betrayal was not limited to me. She destroyed our family, dishonored the years of love, erased the memories as if they were nothing. The look on a son's face when he discovers that his mother is not the righteous woman he always believed she was is a much greater punishment than any divorce. She tried to speak again, her voice choked, trembling, but I didn't want to hear it anymore. There was no justification that could fix what was done. You don't love him, my voice sounded lower, but full of certainty. You just wanted the risk, the adrenaline, the forbidden. Now that everything has been exposed, what's left? Do you think he'll stay by your side after this? The man next to her shifted uncomfortably, as if he wanted to disappear. She turned her face to him, seeking support, but found nothing but hesitation. And it was there that she began to realize that, perhaps, she was betting all her chips on a game that was already lost before it even started. She never thought I would find out. He never imagined that, when he revealed his betrayal, I would already be prepared, one step ahead. She expected tears, pleas, a desperate attempt to stop her from leaving. But all he found was a wall of coldness and indifference. My love for her died the moment I found out about the betrayal. I was just waiting for her to give me a reason to bury him for good. The lover cleared his throat, trying to say something, but I raised my hand, interrupting any attempt at explanation. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you have. What matters is that, from today onwards, she means nothing to me. I looked into her eyes one last time, and for the first time I saw something that resembled regret. But it wasn't because he cheated on me. It was about losing everything. She thought she would have power over me. That I would be devastated, that I would beg, that she would emerge as the desired woman, in control of the narrative. But now, here, in front of me, she was realizing that she had lost the game before she had even started to actually play it. And the worst part? The game is not over yet. This was just the beginning. What she doesn't know, what no one knows, is that destiny still has cards to play. And she's not ready for what comes next. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support cheating in any form. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the moral is clear: betrayal destroys lives, corrodes bonds, and always has a high price to be paid. Each narrative is a realistic portrayal of the devastating consequences of infidelity. Get ready, because what comes next is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Fasten your seatbelts, because this story will move you. The life of Daniel and Laura seemed perfect to those who observed them from the outside. A solid couple, with years of shared history, a home built with dedication and 2 children who were living proof of a love that, one day, was genuine and intense. From their first meeting, when they first saw each other in a busy coffee shop, there was something between them that transcended the ordinary. Her gaze, full of curiosity and sweetness, found in his a security that he had rarely felt in his life. He, in turn, saw in her the exact mix of strength and delicacy, as if he had found the only person capable of understanding her silences and her internal storms. Their romance began with an intensity that defied all logic. The conversation seemed to never end, the messages exchanged throughout the day had a youthful freshness, and the time spent with each other was always short. However, over the years, that burning passion transformed into something more stable, more serene, but also more predictable. Marriage brought routine, children brought responsibilities, and life settled into the comfort of a safe daily life, but without the surprises and impulses of the early days. Daniel was a man with a firm gaze and an imposing posture, but he carried a heart that always beat strong for his family. Dedicated, hardworking, he never spared any effort to ensure that Laura and the children had everything they needed. His job in the financial sector demanded a lot from him, but he never allowed himself to be the kind of man who got so immersed in his work that he forgot about his own home. He made a point of being present at important moments, at school meetings, at his children's presentations, at family dinners, even if he sometimes arrived tired. He believed that small gestures made a difference, that love was in everyday attitudes, and not just in big declarations or important events. He liked the life they built together, and, even if the flame of passion was no longer the same, there was affection, there was respect, there was a feeling of belonging that made it all worth it. Laura, on the other hand, has always been more driven by emotion than reason. She was a woman with a restless spirit, thirsty for life, for experiences, for something that made her feel alive. Despite this, she was never careless with her family. She loved her children with all her might and was proud of the home they built together. However, as time passed, she began to feel an invisible weight on her shoulders, a feeling that something was missing, that life was slipping through her fingers without her actually living it. The routine began to suffocate her. The days seemed like an endless repetition of the previous ones. Conversations with Daniel were almost always about the same things, the same concerns, the same commitments. He was an exemplary husband, but perhaps too good, too predictable, too stable. And deep down, Laura began to wonder if stability was all she wanted in life. The house they lived in was spacious and well organized, reflecting their personalities. The room had elegant but not ostentatious furniture, and the large windows let in sunlight, illuminating every corner with a welcoming tranquility. On the walls, photos of the family in happy moments, trips, birthdays, moments frozen in time as evidence of a story that, little by little, was becoming distant from the current reality. The couple's bedroom, which had once been the scene of nights full of desire and complicity, was now an environment of silence and tiredness. The touch between them had become rare, the kisses hurried, the conversations emotionless. And, even though Daniel hadn't realized the magnitude of this change, Laura felt the absence of what they once had like a hole inside of them. Children were the link that kept them connected in the most intense way. Daniel always made a point of being a present father, of being present at important moments, of teaching them to grow up with solid principles. Laura, despite her internal conflicts, was also a dedicated mother, and would never allow anything to interfere with their well-being. For children, parents were a unit, an unshakable fortress. They never witnessed serious fights, never felt any threat to that structure that seemed to be unbreakable. But the cracks were there, hidden beneath the surface, silent but real. The couple's social circle was wide. They had lifelong friends, families that got together on weekends for dinners and casual get-togethers. Laura enjoyed these meetings, but at the same time, she felt an uneasiness growing within her. He watched other couples and sometimes wondered if they were all pretending the same thing. If everyone carried, in secret, that same weight that she carried. If every woman looked at her husband and wondered what it would have been like if they had made different choices. Or if it was just her mind searching for something that might not even really exist. Daniel, in turn, did not understand the signals that his wife was sending. For him, the marriage was still solid, life was still good. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but what was? He believed they were fine, that true love went through phases, that the most important thing was building something bigger. He didn't see the restlessness in her eyes, he didn't notice the lack of brightness in her smile, he didn't notice the moments when she seemed to be far away, lost in thoughts that he couldn't reach. He loved her, in his own way, and believed that was enough. And so the days went on, one after another, without major changes, without major disruptions. The routine, which for him was comfort, for her became an invisible prison. Home, which for him was the symbol of everything they had achieved together, began to seem like a gilded cage to her. Time, which for him was a test of endurance and commitment, for her was a cruel reminder that youth was fading away, taking with it dreams and desires that were never fulfilled. But Daniel still didn't know. I didn't know that while he was worrying about keeping everything going, about being the exemplary husband and father, the world as he knew it was about to fall apart. I didn't know that Laura had already overcome barriers that could no longer be reversed. That he had made decisions that he could never take back. That, inside his heart, something was already broken. And when the truth came out, when everything was exposed, nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel's days passed within an unbreakable normality. Work demanded his attention, his children occupied his time, and the house, even though it was silent at times, was still a home for him. Routine was his anchor, the certainty that everything was under control. Yet there was something in the air, a subtle change that he couldn't name. Laura seemed more distant, not abruptly, but in small ways. The gazes that previously met now looked away. Conversations that were once natural have become mechanical. She didn't argue, she didn't fight, but she didn't give in either. Her presence was there, but her essence seemed elsewhere. Daniel noticed, but convinced himself that it was just the weight of responsibilities, the exhausting phase that every couple went through. And then, little by little, he stopped questioning. Laura, on the other hand, lived in a parallel universe within her own house. The feeling of imprisonment that consumed her had become unbearable. She looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman she saw reflected back. The traces of youth were still there, but something inside her screamed for freedom, for excitement, for something that would make her heart race again. The marriage had become a cold, uninhabitable room, and the more Daniel tried to normalize that predictable life, the more suffocated she felt. He didn't see her, he didn't feel her, he didn't notice the storms that were forming inside her. And then, like a spark in the darkness, an opportunity arose. A name that began to appear in her thoughts with increasing frequency. A chance encounter that shouldn't mean anything, but became everything. The man appeared without warning, without planning. A friend of a friend, a face that began to be repeated in the places Laura frequented. First, a longer look. Then, a small talk. Then messages exchanged at unexpected times. There was no clear intention at first, just the excitement of something new, of someone seeing her in a different way. The dialogues were engaging, full of subtle but dangerous flirtation. Laura felt an adrenaline rush that she hadn't experienced in years. Your heart beat faster when your phone vibrated, your fingers slid across the screen anxiously. The forbidden enveloped her, and the desire to escape the monotony became stronger than any remnant of conscience that still tried to speak louder. The meetings began discreetly, small moments stolen from everyday life, pretexts to extend conversations that shouldn't exist. But the line between curiosity and betrayal became thinner and thinner. Until one day, he crossed paths of no return. The first touch, the first proximity beyond what is acceptable. An afternoon that should have been ordinary turned into the first unforgivable mistake. The stolen kiss in the parking lot of a cafe, the rapid breathing, the blood boiling like it hadn't happened in a long time. She should have stopped there. I could have taken a step back, gone home, pretended nothing happened. But that's not what he did. The time that followed was a game of calculated risks. Longer, more intense meetings. The touches became an addiction, the need to be with him grew every day. The fear of being discovered existed, but it was always drowned out by the emotion of the moment. The feeling of being alive again overcame any guilt that tried to arise. Laura saw herself as a woman who was finally taking control of her own life, who no longer wanted to be the submissive wife in a lukewarm marriage. She wanted to feel, she wanted to desire and be desired. And every day, he moved further away from Daniel, without him realizing the depth of that distance. The children were the first to notice that something was not right. The way her mother seemed to always be absent, even though she was there. The short answers, the lack of patience, the blank stares when no one was watching. The connection that previously existed was dissipating, and even though they didn't know how to name what was happening, they felt that her presence was no longer the same. Daniel was still oblivious, immersed in work and daily obligations, believing that everything was fine. Until small signs started to appear. A change in Laura's habits. The cell phone that was never on the table again, the frequent trips to meet friends, the messages answered quickly and then deleted. He wanted to trust, wanted to believe that his wife was the same woman he met years ago. But something inside him was starting to scream. The nights became colder. Laura spent more time away from bed, citing insomnia. He watched her from afar, trying to understand what was happening. One night, he silently got up and found her sitting in the living room, the phone in her hands, her gaze fixed on the screen, a discreet smile on her face. When she noticed its presence, she quickly hid the device. And it was there that the first fissure opened inside him. From that moment on, Daniel began to notice everything. The different scent when returning home. The sparkle in his eyes that he hadn't seen in a while, but that clearly wasn't from him. The long showers, the empty excuses, the growing impatience when he asked too many questions. His instincts woke up. Confidence, previously unshakable, began to crumble. He began to observe her with more attentive eyes, looking for answers that she would not give him. The checks on his cell phone in the early hours of the morning, the meetings that weren't mentioned, the way he always seemed distant. And then came the first shock. The day he took her phone by mistake. The name that appeared insistently in the messages, the texts filled with affection that was no longer directed at him. Confirmations of meetings, plans made in secret. Daniel's heart weighed in his chest like a block of concrete. The evidence was there, cold and implacable. There was no longer any doubt. There was no turning back. At that moment, something inside him died. The man who believed he had a solid marriage, who trusted his wife, who never imagined he would go through this, collapsed in silence. He could have confronted Laura right then and there, thrown the evidence on the table, demanded answers. But he didn't do that. I didn't just want words, I wanted the naked truth, without subterfuge. He decided to wait, pretend nothing had changed. And then, he prepared for the right moment. The day everything would come to a head. The day she would finally admit what she had been hiding. And that day came faster than I expected. The moment Laura crossed the line once and for all, bringing her lover into the house. Her expression when she declared without hesitation that she loved another man, as if that were just a detail, a simple change of plans. Daniel's world spun, but he was ready. Silence reigned for a moment, just long enough for her to think she had control. But he already knew everything. And at that moment, it was she who realized that she was about to lose much more than she imagined. Silence took over the house like a suffocating weight. Laura was still standing still, her eyes fixed on Daniel, trying to understand what was happening, trying to decipher his cold expression, a look she had never seen before. The lover at his side was beginning to feel uncomfortable, as if he were invading a space that, deep down, never belonged to him. Daniel, however, didn't show fury, didn't scream, didn't react as she expected. This worried her more than any scream or tantrum. He already knew. This was evident the moment he responded in that calm voice, as if each word carried a death sentence for what was left of that marriage. The air seemed thick, charged with something invisible but sharp. Laura tried to move, to say something that would explain, that would bring any justification that could lessen the impact of what she had done, but she realized that anything she said would sound ridiculous given what was about to happen. His silence wasn't an empty space waiting to be filled with apologies. It was an abyss where everything that existed between them had already been thrown, shattered, irreparable. The lover cleared his throat, uncomfortable, feeling like he was there like an extra in a scene he should never have participated in. He didn't know whether to speak or just disappear. But before anyone could move, Daniel finally moved, crossing his arms, watching Laura as if he were seeing a complete stranger. The tension exploded when Daniel laughed, a low, ironic laugh, filled with something that Laura couldn't immediately decipher. She knew him too well to know that this wasn't the laugh of someone defeated. There was something there, something beyond her control. He tilted his head, analyzing her from top to bottom, as if trying to record every detail of the woman he once loved, but who now seemed just a specter from the past. Then Daniel opened his mouth, and Laura's world began to fall apart. He started by telling her about the nights he pretended to be oblivious, the days he saw her disconnected, the moments he noticed the small changes. He told how he knew about the hidden phone, the deleted messages, the lame excuses. But that wasn't the shock. The real blow came when he revealed that, long before she thought about confessing, he had already taken all the steps. She said that, when she realized that something was wrong, she looked for a lawyer, prepared the documents, changed the assets, removed any rights she might have had over what they built together. Every detail was planned, every step meticulously calculated. He didn't just wait for her to reveal herself, he engineered her downfall. Laura's eyes widened, feeling a chill run down her spine. She tried to argue, to say that she was still the mother of his children, that they still had a story, but he interrupted her, without raising his voice, just throwing the naked truth on the table. The children already knew. He told them the truth before she even had the chance to try and manipulate them with any distorted version of the facts. They were not on her side. They saw her for what she really was. And the image of the mother who protected and guided them had been shattered forever. The lover backed away, realizing he was in territory he should never have stepped into. She tried to hold Laura's hand, but she broke away, lost in the avalanche of truths that hit her mercilessly. Daniel wasn't there to hear her justify herself, he didn't want tears, fake regrets or requests for forgiveness. He wanted her to feel, to absorb the scale of what she had done. And he succeeded. Her expression began to change, despair settling into every line of her face. The confidence she had in bringing another man into their home evaporated the moment she realized Daniel had never been at a disadvantage. On the contrary. He was the only one who knew exactly where it would end. She tried to argue that a marriage doesn't break up like that, that they could still talk, that there was a way to resolve it. But Daniel stepped forward, looking straight into her eyes, and his voice was lower, colder than ever. You've already been resolved, Laura. Before you even opened your mouth to tell me that you loved someone else, I had already taken you out of my life. And it was at that moment that she understood that there was no return. There was no more house, no more children, no more family, nothing else. The lover, who before seemed like a safe haven, was now just a stranger beside her, worthless. And the penny dropped in the worst way possible. She never expected this. I never imagined that Daniel would be able to dismantle everything so quickly, with such precision. He thought he would have some kind of control, that he could get out of that relationship while keeping something for himself. But now I saw clearly that he left nothing behind. Nothing was left to be rescued. The house was no longer hers. His children were no longer by his side. And that marriage, which had once been his foundation, was now just ashes. The penny dropped in a brutal instant. The lover at her side was not a consolation prize. He was the beginning of his own hell. And Daniel knew it. That's why he was calm. That's why it didn't change. Because he didn't lose. He won. She wanted to say something, but her voice trailed off. Silence swallowed his words. And for the first time, she found herself exactly where she never wanted to be. Alone. Completely alone. The room remained immersed in an overwhelming silence, heavy as a mourning that had not yet been declared. Laura felt her heart pounding against her chest, but it wasn't from excitement anymore, it wasn't the adrenaline of the forbidden, it wasn't the fire of passion that had consumed her in the last few months. Now it was cold despair, bitter recognition of the destruction she herself had caused. The lover at her side was no longer a comforting presence, but a reminder of the abyss she had thrown herself into without even realizing the depth. He was there, standing still, but he didn't offer support, he didn't hold her hand, he didn't say words of reassurance. He just existed, dislocated, uncomfortable, as if he understood that his presence there was irrelevant given the magnitude of what had just happened. Daniel remained expressionless, the calculated calm of someone who was already at peace with everything. He didn't show anger, he didn't shout, he didn't ask for explanations. And that hurt her more than any confrontation. She expected out of control, expected accusations, expected anything that would give her the chance to defend herself, to try to reverse the narrative, to make him see her as someone who also suffered, who also had her reasons. But he didn't give that opportunity. He had already ended everything before she even had the chance to try to justify it. The lover, without the courage to face that situation any longer, cleared his throat, hesitantly, trying to address Daniel in some way, but the intensity of the look he received in return made him realize that his presence there was a mistake. He was not part of that story. He was just a detail, a disposable accessory to a much larger plot. Laura, on the other hand, felt her despair grow when she realized he was about to leave. She tried to hold his arm, tried to keep him there, but he moved away with a short, almost imperceptible movement. And then, without saying a single word, he turned and left, leaving her alone in the chaos she helped create. She turned to Daniel, trying to find some opening, some chance to get him to look at her differently. But he had already closed himself off completely. His gaze was that of a stranger. That person who spent years by your side, who shared secrets, plans, dreams, was now a stranger who no longer felt anything. And that indifference hurt more than if he hated her. Because hate would still be a feeling, it would still indicate that, in some way, she mattered. But the total absence of emotion was a clear sign that she no longer had a place there. She tried to speak, tried to get closer, but he raised his hand slightly, indicating that he didn't want to hear. The simple gesture was a blow to the gut. He didn't need to say anything else. She understood that there was no longer room for any attempt at redemption. And, at that moment, the penny dropped with crushing brutality. She had lost everything. Not just the marriage, not just the home they shared for so many years. She lost the respect of her children, she lost her image as a mother, she lost the right to be seen as someone trustworthy, she lost the love of a man who, until recently, would do anything for her. The house that was once his refuge now seemed like a strange place, a space that no longer belonged to him. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every detail of that environment bore the mark of a life that she destroyed with her own hands. The urgency to find a safe place began to grow within her, but there was nowhere else to run. Her own choice had put her at that point of no return, and now all that was left was to face the consequences. Daniel took a deep breath, looking around, as if he was silently saying goodbye to that chapter of his life. He moved slowly, taking his time, picking up the keys from the table, walking to the door. He didn't kick her out, he didn't give her any big speech. He simply left, leaving her alone among the ruins. And it was there, at that exact moment, that reality fell on her like an avalanche. The days that followed were torment. The house, now empty, seemed bigger, the echoes of a life that no longer existed resounded in every corner. Her children didn't care, they didn't look for her, and each of their absences was a new wound opening. The lover, the one who was supposed to be her new beginning, was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. After that night, he didn't try to contact me. She was completely alone. Laura tried to rebuild something, tried to gather the strength to move forward, but every door she knocked was closed. His name was now a whisper among acquaintances, a symbol of destruction. Wherever I went, I felt the looks, the whispers, the way people avoided getting involved. She lost everything, and no one was willing to offer her a fresh start. Meanwhile, Daniel went on with his life. He did not allow the pain of betrayal to consume him. He took it as a cruel but necessary learning experience. He realized that he spent too much time trying to hold on to something that was already broken, trying to sustain a love that only existed for him. And so, he decided that his life would not end there. Little by little, he remade his bonds, rebuilt his routine, found new paths. And, to the surprise of many, he found someone. A woman who carried no shadows of the past, who saw him for who he really was, who offered him something genuine, without secrets, without betrayal. And it was when Laura found out about this that she felt the final blow. Not because she still loved him, but because she realized he moved on while she stayed behind. He found new happiness while she was stuck in her own mistake. And, at that moment, he realized that he wasn't the one who lost. He gained a new life. And she, for the first time, understood the true meaning of the word repentance. The days unfolded into weeks and, over time, life seemed to have taken a definitive course for both of them, but the past never completely unravels, it only shapes itself, haunting in unexpected ways. Laura felt this every morning when she woke up alone in a house that no longer had the same warmth. The silence was now no longer a refuge, but a sentence. The absence of her children weighed on her like an invisible burden. She had already tried calling, sending messages, even looking for them in person, but there was no more room for her in their lives. Disappointment was something that could not be resolved with words or excuses. They were hurt, distant, and perhaps they would never look at her the way they used to. Their rejection was eating her up from the inside out. She tried to maintain a routine, to create some kind of normality amidst the chaos, but it was impossible to ignore the reality that crushed her. She was no longer welcome among her former friends, and the faces that once smiled at her now looked away, pretending not to see her. She had become a specter of the woman she once was. She tried to convince herself that she could still start over, but each attempt brought her back to the same void. It was on a cold afternoon that, without planning, she decided to do something that she had avoided since the day Daniel left her behind. She drove to her children's school. She stayed there, parked, watching from afar. The youngest left first, surrounded by classmates, laughing at something one of them said. For a moment, Laura felt a twinge of hope, as if he were still her little boy, approachable, affectionate, as before. But then he saw his eldest daughter coming out right behind, walking with a more closed, serious posture, too mature for her age. They looked so much alike. And suddenly, an impulse took over Laura. He got out of the car, crossed the street and called his daughter's name. His voice was choked, hesitant, as if he was afraid of the answer. The girl stopped, eyes meeting hers with a coldness Laura had never experienced. The youngest son saw her soon after, and for a moment he seemed confused, as if he didn't know how to react. But then, the sister touched her arm lightly, a simple gesture, but full of meaning. And at that moment, he looked away and continued walking, ignoring his mother's presence completely. Laura felt as if she had been hit in the chest. She called again, quieter this time, but her daughter just took a deep breath, stopped and looked directly at her. The words that came next were spoken with piercing clarity. "It's no use, Mom. You chose. Now bear the consequences." And then he turned his back and followed his brother, without looking back. Laura felt her legs give out and held on to the side of the car to keep from falling. The world was spinning, my heart was beating fast, my breathing was short. I didn't expect immediate forgiveness, but the children's indifference was more cruel than any harsh word. They erased her from their lives, just like Daniel did. She was just a buried past. The next few minutes were a blur. She got into the car without even remembering how she got there and drove aimlessly. The path was automatic, thoughts were confused, trapped in the rejection I had just experienced. Her daughter's words echoed like a hammer in her mind. You chose. Now bear the consequences. She stopped the car without realizing that she had arrived in a neighborhood she didn't usually go to. A discreet restaurant on the corner caught his eye. It was a new place, with no memories associated with Daniel, no memories of the past. Something inside her needed to breathe away from everything that reminded her of who she once was. He entered and sat at a table in the back. The waiter came, but she didn't even pay attention to what she ordered. I just wanted a moment to exist without being seen, without being judged. The movement in the restaurant was moderate, couples were talking, friends were toasting. And then, something made her freeze. A few meters away, sitting comfortably, was Daniel. Time seemed to slow down. He was different. The weight of betrayal that he once carried seemed to no longer exist on his face. He smiled, gestured, spoke naturally, but he was not alone. The woman sitting in front of him had a serene look, a calm presence. She didn't show exaggeration, she didn't try to impress him, she just existed there, next to him, as if she were effortlessly part of that moment. Laura felt a sharp pang inside her, a mix of emotions she couldn't even name. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't anger, it was something worse. It was the realization that he had moved on. And she didn't. He didn't see her. He was immersed in the conversation, in the company, in the new life he had built. And then, for the first time, Laura asked herself, what if she had done things differently? What if he had fought for what he had instead of destroying everything? But the answer came quickly, mercilessly. It didn't matter anymore. The waiter came back, asking if he wanted anything else. She shook her head, got up, left the payment on the table and left. The cold night air hit his face, but it brought no relief. He walked aimlessly, his steps slow, his mind spinning with memories, mistakes, emptiness. Nothing could be undone. The past was written. And now, all she had to do was carry the weight of her own choices. Time continued its course, indifferent to the chaos that had been left behind. Laura couldn't remember the last time she woke up without the crushing weight of guilt. Every morning was the same, the cold sheets around her, the echo of silence in an empty house, and the thoughts that trapped her in the same cycle of regret. I tried to continue, but where? Her world had fallen apart, and no one seemed willing to help her pick up the pieces. The past was a weight that didn't let her breathe. The children? They didn't respond. Daniel? It no longer existed. The man she threw everything away for. He didn't even leave a trace. Each day seemed more difficult than the last. Money started to run out. The life that was once comfortable has become a burden. He sought support from friends, but those who remained were few and far between. Each attempt to approach was met with a wall of indifference. Eyes avoided hers, as if her presence were an uncomfortable reminder of what happens to those who choose betrayal as their path. Loneliness became an inevitable punishment. I stared at the phone, waiting for a message that never arrived. Sometimes she would get in her car and drive aimlessly, trying to find meaning, anything that would make her feel like she still existed. But everything seemed lost. Daniel, on the other hand, moved on. Not overnight, but in small steps that made the path clearer. Time has healed the wounds. Little by little, what was once an unbearable weight became just a distant memory. He rebuilt his life, his routine, his dreams. But most of all, he rebuilt himself. His children remained by his side, and that was all that mattered. The relationship with them grew stronger than ever, as there was now absolute transparency and unbreakable trust. They saw the pain he endured, they saw the dignity with which he handled everything, and it made them respect him even more. And then the unexpected happened. In the midst of his new routine, he met someone. It wasn't something planned, it wasn't something he sought. It happened at the right time, in the right way. She was a woman with a different shine, someone who didn't carry shadows, who didn't bring with her the ghosts of the past. Someone who just showed up and stayed. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he could breathe again, that he could allow himself to feel something he had forgotten. She didn't need to fill in gaps, as he had already done it himself. It just added up. And that was the difference. The day Laura found out was the day her world finally completely collapsed. She found out from others, as there was no longer room for her to find out directly from him. An acquaintance casually mentioned that he saw him in a restaurant, accompanied, smiling. An insignificant detail for anyone, but for her it was the final blow. The man who once loved her more than anything, the one she thought was incapable of carrying on without her, was happy. And worse, I was happy without her. For the first time, Laura felt what Daniel must have felt when he discovered the betrayal. The pain of being replaced, the pain of knowing that he was now just a memory in someone's life. And that was the biggest punishment of all. Tried contact one last time. He picked up the phone, typed the message, deleted it. Tried again. What could you say? I miss you. Forgive me. We can talk. No sentence seemed enough. No words seemed capable of erasing everything he did. But in the end, he sent it. A simple message. Can we meet? I just want to talk. The answer came hours later. A single no. She stared at the screen, her stomach churning, her eyes burning. He tried to digest it. He tried to convince himself that he could find another way. But there was no longer a way. Daniel had completely erased it. Night fell, and Laura felt the house weighing down on her. For the first time, he understood that this was definitive. Cheating didn't just destroy your marriage. It destroyed his life. It destroyed her connection with her children. He destroyed his image, his identity, everything he built. And now, here she was, sitting in the darkness, with nothing but regrets. Daniel never looked back. She never felt like responding, never felt like knowing where Laura was. He no longer carried hurt, just indifference. Because in the end, he won. He survived. And now, there was a new story, where betrayal no longer had a place. Now that you've come this far, tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your comment, your opinion. The channel always brings impactful stories like this, so subscribe now so you don't miss the next videos. And remember, betrayal is never worth it.